The Battle of Mazocoba, or the Mazocoba massacre, was a major engagement of the Yaqui Wars that was fought in Sonora, Mexico. On January 18, 1900, a Mexican army expedition encountered hundreds of Yaqui renegades about 20 miles east of Guaymas. During the battle that followed, several hundred people were killed or wounded and over 1,000 Yaqui were taken prisoner. Battle. By the turn of the 19th century, the Yaqui people and the Mexicans had been fighting each other for years, though there were occasional periods of peace. In 1897, the Mexican army officer General Lorenzo Torres opened up negotiations with the Yaqui chief Tete or Juan Maldonado, who led a band of several hundred people. In May 1897 they signed a peace treaty at Ortiz which, among other things, called for the Yaqui to abandon their traditional lifestyle and become individual landowners. Tete and about 400 of his people surrendered, but shortly thereafter they returned to the Sierra del Bacatete, west of Guaymas, to continue raiding. The situation became more serious in August 1899 when the Yaqui at Bacum and Vicam took up arms. General Torres had been ignoring the terms of the peace treaty by continuing to occupy Yaqui territory, so over 2,000 warriors assembled along the Rio Yaqui. During the ensuing battle, the Yaqui suffered many casualties and had to retreat. After that, Tete led in between 2,000 and 3,000 people onto a rocky desert plateau roughly 25 square miles in size and about 25 miles east of Guaymas. General Torres responded by fielding the largest army ever sent against the Yaqui, over 5,000 men, both federal and state soldiers. According to conflicting accounts, on January 18, 1900, General Torres was leading a force of 1,000 to as many as 3,000 soldiers when he encountered Tete and about 2,000 of his warriors in the Mazocoba. The New York Times issued a newspaper on February 3, 1900 that said Tete and Santa Teresa were heading to Guaymas with their band to capture the port, and they had only gone 8 miles before the Mexicans caught up. It also said that there were other Yaqui still holding the mouth of the Rio Yaqui, and that they had stopped all steamships from entering or exiting the river. According to the same New York Times article, which incorrectly stated that the battle occurred on January 25, fighting began at 8 a.m. and lasted for 3 hours, by which time General Torres and 89 of his men were killed. Another 210 were captured and 59 men were missing. General Torres was not actually killed though, and he continued fighting the Yaqui for months afterwards. One other account puts the Mexicans' losses at 54 killed and 125 wounded, but this is likely false as it makes no mention of the several dozen men who went missing during the fight. They were not pursued and instead the Mexicans withdrew. Yaqui casualties also differ widely, though it is generally recognized that at least 397 men, women and children were killed while about 1,000 more were captured. Several of the natives committed suicide rather than surrender. Other accounts put the Yaqui death toll at over 1,000, while the New York Times said that only 90 were killed or wounded and 66 were captured. Aftermath. After the battle, Colonel Garcia Peña estimated the Yaqui strength to be in between 900 and 1,040, held up in the Bacatetes, though by the end of the year General Torres estimated that there were only about 300. Tete himself was killed by one of his own men in 1901, and by August the Mexican army had ended its campaign. This was mainly because of how expensive it was to wage war against the Yaqui and due to President Porfirio Diaz's extermination and deportation policy. The thought of removing the Yaqui from northern Mexico had been brought up as early as the 1860s, but it wasn't until 1902 Diaz put the idea into action. The Yaqui were the main target for deportation, but Opata, Pimas and Mayosh were also removed. Most of the natives were rounded up by Colonel Emilio Kostolitsky, sent to San Blas, in Nayarit, and then from there to the henequen plantations in the Yucatan or to the sugarcane plantations in Oaxaca. Many died in captivity, either by killing themselves or by foul treatment. Those who escaped deportation were dispersed across northern Mexico, and some even settled across the international border in southern Arizona. Not even the Cherokee, whose deportation in 1835 from Georgia to Oklahoma had initiated a scattering over the United States, were so widely dispersed, though the Army ceased their campaign in August 1901. It wasn't until January of 1909 that the majority of the Yaqui in the Sierra del Bacatete surrendered. The Mexican government allowed some to settle on vacant land in the Rio Yaqui Valley, but the rest were apparently deported. Between 1902 and 1908, between 8,000 and 15,000 Yaqui, out of an estimated population of 30,000, were deported. The Yaqui who surrendered in 1909 were led by Luis Bully, who agreed to help the Mexicans track down the remaining renegades under Luis Espinosa. Their efforts were largely ineffective though, and when the Mexican Revolution began in 1910, Espinosa and his band were still fighting their own war.